Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. Back in the summer of 2019, my girlfriend Rachel and I decided to take a camping trip through rural Pennsylvania. We were both 26, working dead-end jobs in Philadelphia, and desperately needed to disconnect from the city noise. Rachel had found this spot online, an old limestone quarry about 3 hours north of Philly, supposedly abandoned since the 1970s. The reviews said it was perfect for primitive camping, completely isolated, with these incredible turquoise pools at the bottom where rainwater had collected over the decades. We packed our beat-up Honda Civic with our tent, sleeping bags, and enough food for 3 days. Neither of us had any idea what we were really driving toward. The drive up took us through these winding mountain roads that got narrower and more desolate with each mile. By the time we reached the dirt access road leading to the quarry, it was already late afternoon. The GPS signal had died about 20 minutes earlier, but we'd written down the directions from the camping forum. The road was barely wide enough for one car, with thick pine trees pressing in from both sides. Every bump made our camping gear rattle in the trunk. Rachel kept making jokes about horror movie setups, but I could tell she was getting a little nervous too. When we finally saw the rusted chain link fence with the faded "No Trespassing" sign, we knew we'd found the right place. Someone had cut a car-sized hole in the fence years ago, and tire tracks showed we weren't the first ones to take advantage of it. The quarry itself was breathtaking in that eerie post-industrial way. These massive limestone walls dropped down about 100 feet to form a rough rectangle, maybe the size of 2 football fields. The late afternoon sun hit the white stone and made everything glow orange and pink. At the bottom, just like the reviews promised, were these pools of the most unnatural blue-green water I'd ever seen. We found a flat spot to set up camp on the eastern rim, about 30 feet back from the edge. While I struggled with the tent poles, Rachel walked around taking pictures with her phone, even though we had no signal to post them anywhere. She kept saying how quiet it was. No birds, no insects, just the occasional echo of a rock tumbling down the quarry walls. That should have been our first warning, but we were too excited about having the whole place to ourselves. By the time we had everything set up and had eaten our campfire dinner of hot dogs and beans, darkness had completely fallen. Without any light pollution, the stars were incredible. We sat on a blanket near the edge, passing a bottle of whiskey back and forth, feeling like we'd discovered some secret corner of the world. Rachel had brought her portable speaker, but when she tried to play music, it sounded wrong somehow, too loud and harsh against all that silence. We turned it off after one song. That's when we first heard them, voices very faint, drifting up from somewhere down in the quarry. At first, we thought maybe other campers had shown up, but these voices had a strange quality to them. They seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, bouncing off the limestone walls in ways that made it impossible to tell where they originated. We couldn't make out any words, just the rhythm of conversation, like listening to people talk in another room through thick walls. Rachel grabbed my arm and whispered that maybe we should go check if someone needed help. But something about those voices made my stomach twist into knots. They didn't sound like people having a normal conversation. There was this underlying urgency to them, almost like arguing or pleading. We sat there for maybe 10 minutes, just listening, trying to convince ourselves it was probably just sound carrying weird in the quarry. The voices would fade in and out, sometimes sounding closer, sometimes so distant we could barely hear them. Then they stopped. Just cut off mid-sound, like someone had flipped a switch. The silence that followed was somehow worse than the voices had been. Rachel and I looked at each other, and I could see my own unease reflected in her eyes. We decided to call it a night and crawled into our tent, zipping it up tight like that thin layer of nylon could protect us from whatever was out there. Sleep came in fitful bursts. Every time I'd start to drift off, some small sound would jolt me awake. A twig snapping, wind rustling the tent, my own heartbeat loud in my ears. Rachel was restless too, tossing and turning in her sleeping bag. Around what must have been 2 or 3 in the morning, I woke up needing to pee. I lay there for a while, trying to ignore it, but eventually gave up. I unzipped the tent as quietly as possible and stepped out into the cold night air. The moon was almost full, casting everything in this silvery light that made the quarry walls look like bones. I walked a few yards away from the tent to relieve myself, and that's when I heard it. A scream that seemed to come from the very bottom of the quarry. Not a playful scream or a startled yelp, but a raw, desperate sound that made every hair on my body stand up. It lasted maybe 3 seconds, then cut off abruptly, leaving only echoes bouncing between the walls. I practically dove back into the tent, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might burst. Rachel was sitting up in her sleeping bag, eyes wide. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. I nodded, not trusting my voice. We huddled together, listening for any other sounds, but there was nothing. Just that oppressive silence pressing in from all sides. Neither of us suggested going to investigate. We both knew that whatever had made that sound, we wanted no part of it. We spent the rest of the night awake, jumping at every little noise, counting the minutes until sunrise. When the first pale light finally started creeping across the sky, we both pretended we'd managed to get some sleep, but the dark circles under our eyes told the real story. We agreed without saying it out loud. We were packing up and leaving as soon as possible. Morning revealed the quarry in harsh detail. In daylight, it looked less mysterious and more like what it was. An ugly scar carved into the earth and left to rot. We worked quickly to break down camp, neither of us talking much. Rachel kept glancing down into the quarry like she expected to see something floating in those unnatural blue pools. I focused on shoving our gear into the car as fast as possible. We were almost ready to leave when Rachel called out to me. She was standing by a big oak tree near where we'd parked, staring at something attached to the trunk. When I got closer, I saw it was a missing person flyer, the kind you see stapled to telephone poles in cities. But this one was different. The paper was yellowed and weathered, but protected by a clear plastic sleeve that had been carefully tacked to the tree. The photo showed a smiling teenage girl with braces and long brown hair. Ashley Brennan, age 17, missing since June 15, 2003, it read. Below were the usual details. Last seen wearing jeans and a red t-shirt. If you have any information, please call. But someone had written something across the bottom in black marker. She heard them too. We stood there staring at that flyer, neither of us wanting to touch it. The morning sun was already getting warm, but I felt cold all over. Rachel took a photo of it with her phone, her hands trembling slightly. Then we noticed something else. About 10 feet away on another tree was another plastic sleeve. This one held a different flyer. A boy this time, maybe 19 or 20, with a buzz cut and a cocky grin. Tyler Morrison, missing since August 2008. The same handwritten message at the bottom. We found 3 more as we walked back to the car, each one carefully preserved, each one with those same 4 words. The dates ranged from 1998 to 2017. 5 missing people, all young, all last seen somewhere near this quarry. We threw the last of our stuff in the car and got the hell out of there, driving too fast down that narrow dirt road, branches scraping against the windows. About 5 miles down the mountain, we saw a ranger station and decided to stop. We needed to tell someone about the flyers, maybe file a report about the scream. The ranger on duty was an older guy named Bill, probably in his 60s, with the kind of deep tan that comes from spending your whole life outdoors. When we mentioned camping at the old Brackenridge quarry, his friendly expression shifted. He leaned back in his chair and studied us for a long moment. "You kids are lucky," he said finally. "That place has a bad history. Used to be a popular spot for local teenagers to dare each other to climb down into the quarry at night. Proof of courage, that kind of stupid thing kids do. But people started going missing, not all at once, mind you. Every few years someone would go up there and not come back. He told us the state had tried to seal it off multiple times, but people always found a way in. Bill pulled out a manila folder from his desk and showed us newspaper clippings going back decades. Stories about search parties, diving teams checking the pools, investigators bringing in dogs. They never found any bodies. The only pattern was that the disappearances always happened at night, and sometimes other campers reported hearing voices or screams, just like we had. The locals have all kinds of theories, Bill said. Some think it's old mine shafts connecting to the quarry that people fall into. Others say it's methane pockets or some kind of acoustic phenomenon that disorients people, makes them fall. But between you and me, he leaned in closer. I think something lives down there. Something that's been there since long before they carved out that quarry. Something that calls out when it's hungry. He said it matter-of-factly, like he was talking about bears or mountain lions, just another natural hazard to be aware of. We thanked Bill and drove the rest of the way home in mostly silence. Rachel and I broke up about 2 months later. Not because of the quarry exactly, but it changed something between us. We'd seen each other terrified, helpless, and somehow that made everything else feel smaller. I still have nightmares sometimes about those voices echoing off the limestone walls, about that single awful scream. I've done research since then, spent hours going through online forums and old newspaper archives. The quarry has a documented history going back to the 1920s, and there are stories of workers hearing voices even then. They had a name for it. The Calling Dark. Most people assume it's just an urban legend now, a cautionary tale to keep kids from doing dangerous things. But I know what I heard that night. Sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep, I think about those missing person flyers, carefully preserved and maintained by someone. I wonder who puts them up, who replaces them when they get too weathered. I wonder if it's a warning or a memorial. Most of all, I wonder about Ashley Brennan and Tyler Morrison and the others. If they're really gone, or if they're still down there somehow, their voices joining whatever chorus echoes through that abandoned quarry in the dark. I've never gone back, and I never will. But sometimes in my worst moments I feel this pull, like something calling me. I just hope I'm strong enough to never answer. Last summer changed everything for me. My name's Derek and I work as a graphic designer in Portland. Back in July 2023, my two best friends from college, Marcus and Ethan, and I decided to do something we'd been talking about since freshman year. A cross-country camping trip. We were all turning 30 that year and it felt like now or never. Marcus had just gotten laid off from his tech job, Ethan's divorce had finalized in May, and I was burnt out from working 60-hour weeks. We needed this trip. We mapped out a route from Oregon to Maine, planning to hit national parks and hidden campgrounds along the way. The plan was simple. Drive during the day, set up camp before dark, take a photo at each site to document our journey, and just disconnect from everything that was weighing us down. The first week was exactly what we needed. We started at Crater Lake, then wound our way through Idaho and into Yellowstone. Every evening we'd find our designated campsite, set up our 3-person tent, and Marcus would set up his camera on a tripod for our ritual photo. He had this fancy DSLR he'd bought specifically for the trip, said he wanted to capture everything in high resolution. We'd stand in front of the tent, arms around each other's shoulders, grinning like idiots while the timer counted down. After each shot, we'd gather around the camera to check how it turned out, making sure the lighting was good and nobody had their eyes closed. Those moments felt perfect. 3 guys in their 30s acting like kids again. No responsibilities except deciding which trail to hike the next morning. By the time we reached Colorado, we'd fallen into a comfortable rhythm. Wake up with the sun, pack up camp, drive for hours while listening to podcasts and old music from college, then find our next site. The campgrounds varied wildly. Some were crowded with RV families, others were so remote we didn't see another soul. Our photo collection was growing, and Marcus would upload them to his laptop each night to free up space on his camera. We joked about making a coffee table book when we got back, something to show our future kids. The weather had been perfect, nothing but clear skies and warm nights. Even Ethan, who'd been pretty quiet those first few days, was starting to open up again, cracking jokes and suggesting detours to weird roadside attractions. It wasn't until we were in Missouri, our 10th night on the road, that things started to feel different. We'd found this campground just outside the Mark Twain National Forest, a small place with maybe 15 sites total. Only 2 other spots were occupied, both by older couples in RVs parked far from our corner site. The woods pressed in close around us, thick with humidity and the sound of insects. As we set up the tent, I kept getting this crawling sensation on the back of my neck, like someone was watching us. But every time I turned around, there was nothing but trees and shadows. Marcus was fiddling with his camera settings, complaining about the fading light, while Ethan gathered kindling for a fire. Everything seemed normal, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was different about this place. We took our photo just as the sun dipped below the tree line, the golden hour light filtering through the leaves. Marcus had to bump up the ISO because of the dimming conditions, and we did 3 takes, because he kept saying the shadows were too harsh. In the last shot, right as the timer was winding down, a branch cracked somewhere behind the camera. We all heard it, a sharp, deliberate sound that made Ethan flinch mid-smile. Marcus grabbed his camera immediately to check the photo, zooming in to see if we'd all turned toward the noise. We looked fine in the image, just 3 tired guys in front of a blue tent, but he didn't review it closely. The mosquitoes were getting brutal, and we were eager to get the fire started and cook dinner. That night we went to bed earlier than usual. The forest felt too alive, too close, and none of us wanted to admit we were uncomfortable. Nebraska was our next photo stop, at a campground near the Niobrara River. The place was beautiful during the day, wide open spaces, the river glinting in the distance, and prairie grass swaying in the breeze. We'd spent the afternoon swimming and skipping rocks, feeling like kids at summer camp. When evening came, we set up our tent on a small rise overlooking the water. The nearest campers were at least 100 yards away, giving us plenty of privacy. As Marcus prepared his camera for our daily photo, I noticed him squinting at the LCD screen, wiping it with his shirt. He mentioned the lens seemed smudged, even though he'd cleaned it that morning. We took the shot anyway, standing closer together than usual because the wind kept threatening to knock over the tripod. The camera clicked, and we headed back to start dinner, Marcus saying he'd check the photos later when we had better light. Our 13th night brought us to a private campground in Iowa, one of those family-run places with hand-painted signs and an honor box for payment. The owner, an elderly woman named Ruth, had given us the furthest site, saying we'd appreciate the quiet. She was right. We couldn't see any other campers from our spot, just cornfields stretching endlessly in every direction. The silence was different from the forest in Missouri. This was an empty quiet, like the land was holding its breath. We set up camp as the sun began to set, the sky turning brilliant shades of orange and pink. Marcus was excited about the lighting, saying it would make for our best photo yet. He spent extra time adjusting the tripod height and angle, making us move slightly to the left to avoid a utility pole in the background. When we finally took the shot, a flock of blackbirds erupted from the nearby cornfield, their wings creating a rushing sound that made my heart skip. That night in Iowa, none of us slept well. The tent felt smaller somehow, like the walls were pressing in. Ethan kept tossing and turning, occasionally muttering in his sleep. Marcus got up twice to pee, each time taking longer to come back. I lay there listening to the corn rustling in the wind, except there wasn't any wind. Around 3 in the morning, I heard footsteps outside, slow, measured steps circling our tent. I held my breath, waiting for Ethan or Marcus to react, but they were both finally sleeping soundly. The footsteps stopped directly behind my head, just the thin tent fabric between us. I could hear breathing low and steady. My whole body went rigid, afraid to move, afraid to breathe. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, the footsteps moved away, fading into the direction of the cornfield. I didn't sleep again until dawn started breaking, and I never mentioned it to the others. We made it to Wisconsin 2 days later, both of us carefully not talking about how we'd packed up the Iowa campsite in record time that morning. The new campground sat on the shores of a small lake, surrounded by pine trees that reminded me of home. Other families were scattered around, kids running between sites, and the normal noise was comforting after Iowa's oppressive silence. We chose a spot near the water's edge, far enough from others but not isolated. As we set up, Marcus pulled out his laptop to back up the photos from his camera, something he'd been putting off for a few days. I was getting the fire started when I heard him make this strangled sound, like someone had punched him in the stomach. Ethan and I rushed over to see what was wrong. Marcus had the Missouri campground photo pulled up on his screen, zoomed in behind our tent. There, barely visible between the trees, was a figure, just standing there, maybe 30 feet back, watching. Marcus's fingers flew across the trackpad, pulling up the Nebraska photo next. At first, we didn't see anything, just us, the tent, the prairie stretching behind. But then he zoomed in on the left side, past where the river curved. There was someone standing on the opposite bank, so far away they were just a dark smudge. But it was the same posture, the same build. The Iowa photo was the worst. The figure was closer, maybe 50 feet behind our tent, standing at the edge of the cornfield. Even pixelated from the zoom, you could make out more details. Tall, wearing dark clothes, hands hanging at his sides, just standing there, watching. We went through every photo from the trip, our hands trembling as Marcus clicked through them. He appeared in 3 more, Wyoming, South Dakota, and one from just 2 nights ago in Minnesota. Always at different distances, different angles, but unmistakably the same person. In the Minnesota photo, he was close enough that we could see he was wearing what looked like work clothes, maybe coveralls. Ethan wanted to leave immediately, pack everything and drive through the night back home. Marcus was frantically going through his camera's memory card, checking if there were photos we'd deleted, anything that might show more. I stood there staring at the Wisconsin lake, wondering if he was out there right now, watching us discover his presence. We decided to stay. Running felt pointless when he'd already followed us across 8 states. But we moved our tent to a site closer to the camp host's RV, and we took turns staying awake that night. During my watch, around 2 in the morning, I saw someone walk past the bathroom facilities about 100 yards away. Tall, moving slowly, purposefully. They never looked our way, just walked to the edge of the light and stood there. I woke up Marcus, but by the time he grabbed his camera, the figure was gone. We spent the rest of the night sitting by the dying fire, jumping at every sound. The next morning, we made a decision that probably saved us. Instead of continuing east to Maine, we'd drive straight back to Portland, rotating drivers and only stopping for gas. As we packed up, Marcus took one last photo, not of us, but of the empty campsite behind us. He wanted proof, he said, in case we needed it. We drove for 26 hours straight, fueled by gas station coffee and the kind of fear that makes your jaw ache from clenching. When we finally reached Portland, we sat in my apartment and looked at that final photo. The campsite looked normal, peaceful even, but there, reflected in the side mirror of a nearby RV, was a face, watching. We never developed the photos into that coffee table book. Marcus deleted them all except for that last one, which he keeps on an encrypted drive. We don't talk about the trip much, but sometimes when we get together, one of us will ask if the others have seen anyone familiar around town. So far, the answer has always been no. But I still check my mirrors more than I should, and I haven't been camping since. This happened back in October 2018, when my son Tyler was 12, and still thought camping with his old man was the coolest thing ever. I was working as a warehouse supervisor in Atlanta at the time, pulling crazy hours and barely seeing my family. My wife Sarah had been on my case about spending more quality time with Tyler before he hit those teenage years where parents become embarrassing. So when a 3-day weekend rolled around, I booked us a spot at this remote campground up in the North Georgia mountains, about 2 hours from the city. The place was called Whispering Pines, which should have been my first red flag. But I was just excited to disconnect from work emails and teach my kid how to build a proper campfire. We arrived on Friday afternoon, and the campground was practically deserted. The ranger at the check-in booth, an older guy named Earl with tobacco-stained teeth and a lazy eye, told us we'd have our pick of sites since most folks had already cleared out after summer. He recommended Site 47, way at the back of the loop where the trees grew thick and you could barely see your neighbors. Tyler was thrilled about the isolation. He'd been reading all these survival books and wanted to practice his wilderness skills without other campers around to judge his amateur attempts at knot tying. We set up our blue Coleman tent on a flat patch of pine needles, and I let Tyler organize our gear while I gathered firewood from the surrounding forest. The first night was perfect. We roasted hot dogs until they were charred black on the outside, made s'mores with the jumbo marshmallows Tyler insisted on buying, and I told him stories about my own camping trips as a kid. He fell asleep in his sleeping bag while I was explaining how to navigate by the stars, his face still sticky with chocolate. I stayed up a bit longer, enjoying the absolute silence of the woods. No traffic, no neighbors arguing through thin apartment walls, just the occasional hoot of an owl and the crackling of our dying fire. Around midnight, I crawled into the tent and passed out immediately. That deep sleep you only get when you're surrounded by fresh air and pine trees. Saturday was even better. We hiked down to a creek Earl had mentioned, where Tyler spent hours trying to catch minnows with his bare hands, while I dozed on a sun-warmed rock. We saw deer tracks in the mud, and what Tyler swore were bear prints, but looked more like a big dog to me. That evening, we made campfire pizza using a cast-iron pan I'd brought, and Tyler actually said it was better than delivery. By the time darkness fell, we were both exhausted in that good way where your muscles ache, but your mind feels clear. We turned in early, maybe around 9:30, planning to get up at dawn for one more hike before packing up on Sunday. The tapping started at exactly 2:07 a.m. I know because I checked my watch the moment it woke me up. It was this soft, deliberate sound against the tent fabric right near where Tyler's head was. Tap, 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 perfectly spaced, maybe 2 seconds between each one. At first I thought it was just rain starting up, but the rhythm was too regular, too intentional. Then I realized it sounded exactly like someone drumming their fingers on a desk when they're impatient. Tyler was still dead asleep, snoring softly with his mouth open. I lay there for maybe 30 seconds, holding my breath and listening. The tapping moved slowly along the side of the tent, maintaining that same measured beat, like whatever was out there was walking around us in a careful circle. My first thought was raccoons. Those little bastards are bold enough to mess with anything that might have food. But raccoons are chaotic, scrambling and chattering. This was methodical, controlled. I grabbed my flashlight and quietly unzipped the tent flap, trying not to wake Tyler. The tapping stopped immediately, like whatever was out there had heard the zipper and frozen. I stuck my head out first, shining the light in a wide arc around our campsite. Nothing. Not even eye shine from animals. The forest was completely still, which actually made it worse. Usually you hear crickets, frogs, something. But it was like every living thing was holding its breath. I stepped fully out of the tent, barefoot on the cold ground, and did a complete walk around our site, checking behind trees and even up in the branches. The beam of my flashlight cut through the darkness but revealed absolutely nothing unusual. After about 5 minutes of searching, I convinced myself it must have been a branch brushing against the tent, or maybe a curious deer that got spooked when I came out. I climbed back inside, zipped up tight, and tried to settle down. Tyler hadn't even stirred, but I couldn't shake this weird feeling in my gut, like when you know someone's watching you but you can't see them. I lay there with the flashlight beside me, straining to hear any sound outside. 20 minutes passed, 30. Just when I was starting to drift off again, the tapping returned. Same spot, same rhythm, but this time it was on my side of the tent. I grabbed the flashlight and burst out of the tent fast, determined to catch whatever it was. The beam swept across empty forest. No movement, no sounds of anything running away. Even the leaves weren't rustling. The tapping didn't come back after that, but I didn't sleep another minute. I spent the rest of the night sitting up in my sleeping bag, flashlight in hand, listening to every tiny sound outside. Around 5 a.m., just as the sky was starting to lighten, I heard footsteps in the leaves. Heavy, deliberate steps that circled our tent once, and then headed off toward the main trail. By the time I worked up the nerve to look outside again, the sun was coming up and birds were starting their morning songs. Tyler woke up around 6:30, completely oblivious to the night's events, chattering about what we should have for breakfast. I didn't mention the tapping, didn't want to scare him or ruin the trip. We crawled out of the tent together to start packing up, and that's when we saw them. 5 pine cones arranged in a perfect circle, right where our tent door opened. Not scattered randomly like they'd fallen from the trees. These were placed deliberately, each one exactly the same distance from the next, forming a circle about 2 feet across. Tyler thought it was cool, immediately assuming I'd done it as some kind of wilderness art project while he was sleeping. But the pine cones were fresh, still sticky with sap, and they were from white pines. I knew because of their long, elegant shape. The thing is, our campsite was surrounded by loblolly pines, which have completely different cones. The nearest white pines were at least a quarter mile away, according to the trail map. Someone had collected these specific cones and arranged them here in the dark, while I was inside the tent clutching my flashlight like a security blanket. While Tyler was brushing his teeth at the water spigot, I walked over to the next occupied campsite, about 50 yards away through the trees. A middle-aged couple from Tennessee was having coffee at their picnic table. I asked casually if they'd heard anything strange during the night, trying not to sound like a paranoid city boy. The woman, Brenda, immediately perked up and said they'd heard footsteps around 2 a.m., heavy ones moving between the campsites. Her husband, Chuck, had even gotten up to check, thinking it might be a bear, but saw nothing. Then Brenda mentioned something that made my skin prickle. She said it sounded like whoever it was had stopped at several tents, pausing for a few minutes at each one before moving on. They'd assumed it was just the ranger doing rounds, but when they asked Earl about it that morning, he said he'd been home in bed all night, and besides, he never patrolled after 10 p.m. I hustled back to our site and helped Tyler pack up our gear faster than we'd ever broken camp before. He kept asking why we were rushing, and I made up something about wanting to beat traffic back to Atlanta. As we were loading the car, Earl appeared on his golf cart doing his morning rounds. He asked how our stay was, and I mentioned the pine cone circle, trying to laugh it off. His face changed completely. The friendly ranger smile disappeared, and he glanced around nervously before leaning in close. He told me that over the past 2 months, several campers had reported similar experiences. Soft tapping on tents, arranged objects found in the morning, footsteps with no source. Always at the remote sites, always on Saturday nights. The weird part? The campground's registration system showed no other bookings for those nights. According to their records, the people reporting the movements had been the only registered campers in that section. We left immediately after that conversation. Tyler dozed most of the way home while I white-knuckled the steering wheel, checking the rear-view mirror way too often. Back in Atlanta, I did some research on Whispering Pines and found 3 different online forums where people had shared similar stories going back years. Soft tapping on tents, objects arranged in patterns, the feeling of being observed. One post from 2015 really stuck with me. A woman said she'd set up a trail camera after experiencing the tapping, and the next morning the camera was turned around to face a tree. The memory card was missing. I never told Tyler the full story, just said the campground was too crowded, and we'd find somewhere better next time. We never went camping again. Sometimes he asks about it, and I make excuses about work or weather. The truth is, I can't shake the image of someone standing outside our tent in the pitch-black forest, reaching out with deliberate fingers to tap against the thin fabric that separated us from them. Tap, tap, tap. Patient and purposeful, like they had all the time in the world. My name's Derek, and at 35, I'd been fighting fires in Sacramento for almost a decade. Every year in late September, when the worst of the fire season died down, I'd take a week off to go solo hiking. It was my way of clearing my head after months of smoke, sirens, and adrenaline. That particular year, 2019, I'd chosen a remote section of the Marble Mountain Wilderness in Northern California. The plan was simple: hike in for 2 days to reach Sapphire Lake, a pristine alpine lake that most people didn't even know existed. You had to earn your way there through 15 miles of unmarked trails and steep switchbacks. The isolation was exactly what I needed. The hike in was perfect. Cool mornings gave way to warm afternoons, and the forest was alive with the sounds of early fall. Steller's jays called from the pines, and I spotted a black bear ambling through a meadow about 100 yards off the trail. By the second afternoon, I reached Sapphire Lake, and it was even more beautiful than the grainy photos I'd seen online. The water was so clear you could see trout swimming near the rocky bottom, and massive Douglas firs created a natural cathedral around the shoreline. I set up my tent on a flat spot about 50 feet from the water's edge, between two enormous trees that must have been centuries old. The nearest road was at least 20 miles away, and the last hiker I'd seen was yesterday morning. After getting camp established, I headed out to gather firewood. The Forest Service allowed small fires in established rings at the lake, and I wanted to enjoy a modest campfire while I cooked my freeze-dried dinner. I was maybe 200 yards from my tent, following a deer trail through the underbrush, when I saw something that made me stop dead. Through a gap in the trees, partially hidden by low-hanging branches and thick ferns, was the white metal side of what looked like a van. Not a camper van or an RV, but one of those commercial panel vans with no windows except in the front. The kind contractors use. My first thought was confusion. There was literally no way to drive any vehicle to this spot. The hiking trail was the only access, and it was barely wide enough for people walking single file in some places. I pushed through the ferns to get a better look, and sure enough, it was a full-sized white van, a Ford Transit, sitting there like it had been dropped from the sky. Pine needles covered the hood and roof, suggesting it had been there for at least a few days. The tires were caked with mud, and I noticed deep gouges in the bark of several nearby trees, as if the van had been forced between them. Walking around it, I tried to make sense of what I was seeing. There were no roads, no old logging tracks, nothing. The doors were locked, and peering through the driver's window, I couldn't see much in the dim forest light. The interior looked empty except for what might have been some equipment in the back. No keys in the ignition, no personal items visible. The whole thing gave me a deeply uneasy feeling. In all my years of hiking and fighting wildfires in remote areas, I'd never seen anything quite like this. I spent another 10 minutes examining the area around the van, looking for tire tracks or any sign of how it got there. The ground was disturbed in places, branches broken, smaller trees bent at odd angles. It was like someone had bulldozed a path through the forest, but even that didn't fully explain it. The terrain between here and the nearest logging road was impossibly steep, full of ravines and rock outcroppings. As a firefighter, I'd been in plenty of remote locations where we'd had to bring in equipment, and I knew the limitations of vehicles in this kind of terrain. This wasn't just difficult, it was impossible. Yet here, the van sat, real as the trees around it. I took some photos with my phone, though I had no signal out here. Something about the whole situation made me want documentation. Call it professional instinct, but when things don't add up, you want evidence. I headed back to camp with an armload of firewood, but my mind kept returning to that van. Who would go to such extreme lengths to get a vehicle that far into the wilderness, and why? As I started my small fire and boiled water for dinner, I found myself constantly scanning the tree line. The forest felt different now, less peaceful. Every snapping twig made me look up, I'd brought my service pistol. I always did on solo trips, mainly for wildlife protection, and I moved it from my pack to my tent, within easy reach. The rational part of my brain said I was overreacting, probably some weird situation with a stolen vehicle, someone trying to hide it where no one would look. But another part of me, the part that had learned to trust gut feelings in dangerous situations, was on high alert. Night fell faster than usual under the thick canopy. I'd finished my dinner of rehydrated beef stew and was cleaning up when I noticed something through the trees in the direction of the van. A faint glow, barely visible, like someone had turned on a dome light inside a car. I killed my headlamp immediately and sat in the darkness, watching. The light flickered, went out, then came back on. My ears strained for any sound but the normal forest noises, owl calls, rustling leaves, the occasional splash from the lake, masked anything else. After about 5 minutes, the light went out and stayed out. I waited another 20 minutes, muscles tense, before deciding to investigate. Moving as quietly as possible, I crept through the forest toward where I knew the van was parked. About halfway there, I heard it, the distinct sound of a vehicle door closing. Not slamming, but being shut carefully, deliberately. Then another door. Someone was there. I dropped to a crouch behind a massive fir tree, my heart hammering against my ribs. Through the darkness, I could make out 2 shapes moving near the van. Men, both of them, though I couldn't see details. They had flashlights, powerful ones that cut through the forest like white swords. They weren't using them carelessly either. They were methodical, sweeping the beams in careful patterns through the trees, looking for something. Or someone. One of them said something to the other, too low for me to make out words, but the tone was businesslike, focused. These weren't lost hikers or confused tourists. They moved with purpose, and something about their body language, the way they held themselves, reminded me of military or law enforcement. Except, nothing about this situation suggested they were here officially. The men spent several minutes searching the immediate area around the van. Then one of them went back inside while the other continued sweeping his flashlight in expanding circles. The beam was getting closer to my position with each pass. I pressed myself flat against the tree trunk, barely breathing. My hand found the grip of my pistol, but I knew that was an absolute last resort. 2 against 1 in unfamiliar terrain at night. Those weren't odds I wanted to test. The searching man was maybe 30 feet away now, and I could hear his footsteps crunching through the pine needles. He was wearing boots, heavy ones. The flashlight beam swept past my tree so close I could see the texture of the bark illuminated in harsh detail. He paused, and I heard him key what sounded like a radio. "Nothing on the north side," he said, his voice carrying clearly in the still air. "You sure they came this way?" The response was static-filled and unintelligible, but he grunted in acknowledgement and started moving again, thankfully away from my position. I remained frozen for another 10 minutes after both men returned to the van. They seemed to be discussing something, occasionally flashing their lights at the ground as if looking at tracks. Then I heard equipment being moved inside the van, metallic sounds that made my skin crawl. Eventually, they closed up the vehicle and did something that confirmed my worst suspicions. They didn't leave. Instead, they set up what looked like a small camp near the van, just a couple of sleeping bags on the ground, but positioned so they could watch the approaches. One of them took first watch while the other crawled into his bag. These guys were waiting for something, or someone, and they were prepared to wait all night. Every instinct I had was screaming that I needed to get out of there. Whatever these men were doing, it wasn't legal, and it wasn't safe for anyone who stumbled across them. The question was how to get back to my camp, pack up, and leave without them noticing. Moving inch by inch, I retreated the way I'd come. It took me nearly an hour to cover the 200 yards back to my campsite, placing each foot carefully to avoid snapping twigs or rustling leaves. When I finally reached my tent, I didn't dare use any light. Working by feel alone, I stuffed my sleeping bag and essential gear into my pack, leaving the tent and anything that would make noise. My hands worked on muscle memory from years of emergency situations, steady despite the fear coursing through me. I strapped on my pack, holstered my pistol where I could reach it quickly, and started the long hike out in complete darkness. Using the barely visible trail and the sound of the creek that ran alongside it for navigation, I moved as fast as I dared. Behind me, the forest was silent, but that silence felt like a held breath, like something was about to happen. By the time the eastern sky started showing the faintest gray of pre-dawn, I was 8 miles down the trail and moving fast. My legs burned and my throat was raw from breathing hard, but I didn't stop. At first light, I finally allowed myself to check my phone, and miracle of miracles, I had 1 bar of signal. I immediately called 911 and got connected to the county sheriff's department. The dispatcher seemed skeptical at first. A van in an impossible location, armed men in the wilderness. But something in my voice must have convinced her. She took down the GPS coordinates I'd marked on my phone and said they'd send rangers to investigate. I continued hiking out, reaching my truck at the trailhead by noon. 2 sheriff's deputies were waiting for me, along with a Forest Service law enforcement ranger. I gave them a detailed statement, showed them the photos on my phone, and watched as they exchanged meaningful looks. 3 days later, I got a call from the lead investigator. They'd found the van exactly where I said it would be. It had been reported stolen from Eugene, Oregon 2 weeks earlier. Inside, they discovered zip ties, rolls of duct tape, 2 unregistered handguns, and what he described as equipment consistent with abduction and restraint. The men were gone, but they found DNA evidence and fingerprints. Turns out they were suspects in a series of missing hiker cases across Northern California and Southern Oregon. The investigator thanked me for reporting it and said I'd made the right choice getting out when I did. He couldn't give me all the details, but he implied that based on what they found, those men had been using the remote location as a base for hunting solo hikers. The van had been brought in piece by piece and reassembled on site, a level of planning that made me sick to think about. I haven't gone solo hiking since. When I do hit the trails now, it's always with a group, and I find myself constantly scanning the trees for things that don't belong. Some experiences change you, and knowing how close I came to being another missing hiker statistic is something I'll carry forever. I was 29 when I finally pulled the trigger on my dream, quit the corporate grind in Portland, and converted my 2008 Chevy Tahoe into a rolling home. October 2022 found me 2 weeks into a 6-month solo road trip, parked at the Salmon River trailhead about 3 hours east of the city. The gravel lot sat nestled between massive Douglas firs, their branches creating a natural canopy overhead. Perfect spot, really. Enough cell signal to check emails if needed, but remote enough that I hadn't seen another soul since pulling in around sunset. The isolation didn't bother me anymore. After 2 weeks of Walmart parking lots and truck stops, I developed a sixth sense for which places felt right, and which ones made the hair on my neck stand up. That evening had been one of those perfect Pacific Northwest moments. I'd heated up some ramen on my camp stove while the October sun painted the mountains in shades of rust and gold, the kind of light that made everything look like a painting. By 9, I was tucked into my sleeping setup in the back, rain starting its gentle rhythm on the roof. I'd been listening to some true crime podcast, yeah, I see the irony now, and the combination of the narrator's voice and the steady patter of rain had me drifting off by 10:30. The Tahoe was my fortress. Blackout curtains carefully velcroed around every window, a battery-powered fan for air circulation, bear spray and keys always within reach. I'd learned to park facing out for quick exits, crack the front windows just enough for ventilation, and never ever ignore that little voice in your head when it starts whispering warnings. The knocking started at 12:17 a.m. I remember because my phone screen lit up when the sound yanked me from sleep. 3 hard raps on the driver's side window, firm and deliberate, the kind of knock that expects an immediate response. Through the thick fabric of my blackout curtain, a flashlight beam swept across my windshield like a searchlight. For a second, I thought maybe state police checking on vehicles parked overnight, but something held me back from immediately pulling the curtain aside. The knocking came again, louder, more insistent, and then a man's voice muffled through the glass. "Forest Service. Need to speak with you about your camping permit." The words sounded official enough, but there was something in the delivery, too practiced, like an actor who'd rehearsed his lines but hadn't quite nailed the character yet. I kept myself perfectly still, forcing my breathing to stay quiet and shallow. Through a tiny gap where the curtain met the window frame, I could just make out a figure in what appeared to be a tan uniform. The man stood about 6 feet tall, stocky build, positioned so his flashlight would hit me square in the face if I pulled back the curtain. The beam kept dancing around, probing for any opening in my window coverings, trying to get a look inside. "Ma'am, I know you're in there," he called out, and now there was an edge creeping into his voice like frustration barely held in check. "There's been a report of illegal camping in this area. I'm going to need you to step out of the vehicle so we can resolve this quickly." That's when every alarm bell in my head started screaming. Rangers don't patrol remote trailheads at midnight. They don't come alone. They don't demand people exit their vehicles in the darkness. And they sure as hell have marked trucks with light bars, not just a flashlight and a uniform that looked a size too big even from my limited view. I reached for my phone, keeping my movements slow and quiet. The screen brightness nearly blinded me in the darkness, but I managed to dim it while the man outside continued his spiel about permits and regulations. "Ma'am, this doesn't need to be difficult. Just step out so I can verify your information and you can get back to sleep." His flashlight beam stopped moving, focused now on where he probably assumed my head would be. I typed 911 into my phone but didn't hit call yet, wanted to be absolutely sure before I escalated things. "Can I see your identification first?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady and loud enough to carry through the glass. "I'd like to verify your badge number." The silence that followed felt like it stretched for minutes, though it was probably only seconds. The flashlight beam wavered, dropped slightly, then came back up. "Badge is in my vehicle," he responded, but now his voice had changed, less official, more irritated. "Look, we can do this the easy way or the hard way. You're illegally camping on federal land. That's a hefty fine, could even mean towing your vehicle." He stepped closer to my SUV, and I could hear his boots crunching on the gravel. "But if you cooperate now, maybe we can work something out." That last line made my skin crawl. Work something out? At midnight? In an isolated trailhead? I gripped my phone tighter, thumb hovering over the call button. Through the gap in the curtain, I watched him reach for my door handle. Thank God I'd locked everything before bed, a habit my mom had drilled into me since I was 16. The handle rattled as he tested it, and something about that sound, metal against metal in the darkness, flipped a switch in my brain from scared to pissed off. "I'm calling 911 right now," I announced, making sure he could hear the determination in my voice. "If you're really Forest Service, you won't mind having dispatch verify that." I held my phone up to the window where he could see the glowing screen, even if he couldn't make out the numbers. "They can confirm whether there's actually a ranger patrolling this area tonight." The reaction was immediate. He stepped back from my vehicle so fast he nearly stumbled, the flashlight beam swinging wildly. That's not necessary," he said, and now his voice had lost all pretense of authority. I'll leave you a warning. Check in at the ranger station in the morning." But he wasn't moving toward any vehicle, wasn't reaching for any paperwork or warning tickets. He was just standing there, flashlight now pointed at the ground, seeming to calculate his next move. I hit the call button. 911, what's your emergency?" The dispatcher's voice filled my SUV through the speaker, and I saw the man's head snap up. "Hi, I'm at the Salmon River trailhead, and there's a man claiming to be Forest Service demanding I exit my vehicle. He won't show ID and—" But I was talking to air. The moment he heard the dispatcher's voice, the guy took off running. Not toward any official vehicle, but straight into the tree line, his flashlight beam bouncing crazily as he crashed through the underbrush. I watched until the light disappeared completely, swallowed by the darkness of the forest. "Ma'am, are you still there? Are you safe?" The dispatcher's urgent voice brought me back. "Yes, I'm here. I'm locked in my vehicle. The man just ran into the woods when he heard me calling you." My whole body was shaking now, adrenaline making my voice quaver. He said he was Forest Service but had no badge, no vehicle that I could see. He wanted me to get out of my car at midnight. The dispatcher stayed on the line while she sent a real deputy to my location, though she warned it would take at least 45 minutes given how remote I was. Those were the longest 45 minutes of my life. I sat there in the driver's seat, keys in the ignition, ready to start the engine and floor it if I saw any sign of movement. Every shadow became a threat. Every rustle of wind through the trees made me jump. The dispatcher kept talking to me, getting details about the man. Height, build, what I could see of his uniform. I described the tan shirt, the way it seemed to hang loose on his frame, how he'd kept his face angled away from my direct view. She asked if I'd seen any vehicles when I'd pulled in earlier, and I realized I hadn't really paid attention. There'd been no other cars in the lot at sunset, but someone could have easily parked down the road and walked in. When the deputy finally arrived, his spotlight flooding the area with harsh white light, I nearly cried with relief. Deputy Martinez was everything the fake officer wasn't: professional, patient, with a clearly marked Clackamas County Sheriff's vehicle and a badge he showed me immediately when I finally felt safe enough to crack my window. He searched the area with his partner while I gave my statement, but they found nothing except some boot prints leading into the forest. "You did exactly the right thing," Martinez told me, and there was something in his expression that made me pay attention. "We've had reports of someone impersonating officials at various campgrounds over the past month. This is the closest he's come to actually making contact with someone." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "The other reports mentioned someone matching this description watching solo campers, particularly women, but leaving when they were in groups or had dogs." I didn't sleep the rest of that night. Come morning, I drove straight to the nearest ranger station in Zigzag to file a report with the actual Forest Service. The ranger who took my statement, a woman named Beth who'd worked the area for 15 years, went pale when I described the encounter. "We've been trying to catch this guy for weeks," she said, pulling out a map marked with red X's, each one a reported sighting. "You're the first person who's actually engaged with him," heard his voice clearly. "This is going to help a lot." She showed me the pattern they'd been tracking. Always remote trailheads, always between midnight and 3 a.m., always targeting people camping alone. The fake uniform was a new detail. In previous sightings, he'd just been a figure in dark clothing watching from the tree line. "He's escalating," Beth said quietly, and we both knew what that meant. Whatever this man wanted, he was getting bolder about trying to get it. They gave me a case number, took my contact information, and promised to increase patrols in the area. But we all knew the real solution was simpler and sadder. I wouldn't be camping alone anymore, at least not in places that isolated. The freedom I'd been chasing, that solo adventure I'd saved so long for, now came with a shadow I couldn't shake. Even now, months later, safe in my apartment in Bend, I still check my locks obsessively and jump at unexpected knocks on my door. The diesel smell never really leaves your hands, even after a dozen showers. I'm Eli, 31 years old, and I'd been wrenching on big rigs in Missoula for 8 years when this happened. Late September 2022, I was out scouting new hunting territory in the Bitterroot Range, about 40 miles from anything you'd call civilization. Sarah, my wife, had our first baby just 3 months before, a little girl named Emma, who had her mom's eyes and my stubborn streak. This solo trip was supposed to be my last hurrah before diaper duty took over completely. I'd picked this remote chunk of national forest specifically because nobody else hunted there. The terrain was a nightmare of steep ridges and fallen timber, but that's exactly where the monster bulls like to hide during hunting season. The morning it happened started perfect. Crisp air, no wind, fresh elk sign everywhere. I'd hiked in 5 miles from where I'd parked my truck, following game trails through lodgepole pines so thick you couldn't see 20 feet in any direction. Around 10 in the morning, I was working my way along a narrow ridge, moving slow and quiet like you do when you're hunting alone. The forest floor was carpeted in pine needles that muffled every step, and shafts of sunlight cut through the canopy like golden spears. I remember thinking how peaceful it all felt, how far away from civilization I'd managed to get. That's when my boot caught something that shouldn't have been there. I went down hard, rifle clattering against the rocks, my knee slamming into a fallen log. The pain shot up my leg like lightning, but what really got my attention was what had tripped me. A length of paracord stretched taut between two trees, exactly at ankle height. The cord was olive drab, military grade, tied with professional knots that told me whoever set this knew what they were doing. It wasn't old either. The material was clean, no weather damage, maybe a week old at most. My first thought was another hunter had set up some kind of marker, but as I looked closer, I could see this was deliberately placed to trip someone walking this exact path. The hairs on my neck started prickling as I stood up and really looked around. About 30 yards upslope, partially hidden behind a massive Douglas fir, I spotted a tree stand, one of those portable climbing stands hunters use. But something was wrong with the setup. The stand faced downhill toward the trip line, not toward any game trails or clearings where you'd expect elk to pass. Binoculars hung from a branch next to it. Expensive ones, military surplus by the look of them. Fresh food wrappers littered the base of the tree. Energy bars, beef jerky packages, empty water bottles. Someone had been here recently, maybe even this morning. The whole setup made my skin crawl because this wasn't about hunting animals. This was about watching people, and I'd just triggered their alarm system. Every instinct I'd developed in 20 years of hunting screamed at me to get out of there, but I needed to understand what I was looking at first. I limped up to the tree stand, keeping my rifle ready, scanning the forest for any movement. The ladder rungs were worn smooth from use, and I could see boot prints in the dirt, size 11 or 12, deep heel marks from military-style boots. Next to the tree, half buried under pine needles, I found something that made my heart pound even harder. A camouflage tarp covering what looked like supply caches, MREs, water purification tablets, ammunition boxes. This wasn't some weekend hunter's camp. Someone was living out here, staying hidden, and they'd turned this section of forest into their personal surveillance network. The forest had gone dead quiet. No birds, no squirrels, even the wind had died. That kind of silence only happens when something's wrong, when every creature in the woods knows a predator is near. I backed away from the tree slowly, trying to retrace my steps exactly, fighting the urge to run. As I moved, I started noticing things I'd missed before. More cordage strung between trees at different heights, creating a web of trip lines. Disturbed earth that might be covering something. A game camera mounted high on a pine, its lens aimed at the trail I'd just walked. The whole area was rigged like some kind of early warning system, and I was probably on camera right now, being watched by whoever had built this nightmare in the middle of nowhere. I made it back to the main trail and started moving fast, not quite running but close. My knee throbbed where I'd hit the log, but adrenaline kept me going. Every shadow looked like a person. Every snap of a twig sounded like footsteps behind me. About a mile from the trip line, I found another one. This time I saw it before it caught me. Same setup, same military cordage, but this one had small bells attached that would have jingled if I'd hit it. Whoever set these traps had created a perimeter, multiple layers of security around whatever they were protecting or hiding from. The sophistication of it, the planning involved, told me this person had training. Military maybe, or law enforcement gone bad. Either way, they were serious about not being found. The 5 miles back to my truck felt like 50. I kept checking behind me, expecting to see someone following, but the forest stayed empty. When I finally broke through the tree line and saw my old Chevy sitting there in the afternoon sun, I nearly cried with relief. I threw my gear in the back, cranked the engine, and got the hell out of there. But even as I drove, bouncing down that dirt road toward the highway, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd stumbled into something way bigger than just some hermit's camp. The whole setup was too elaborate, too professional. Someone with skills and resources had turned that patch of wilderness into a fortress, and they were watching for intruders. I'd been lucky to walk out at all. The drive to the ranger station in Darby took 2 hours, and I spent every minute of it debating whether to report what I'd found. Part of me wanted to just go home, forget the whole thing, pretend I'd never seen those trip lines. But I kept thinking about other hunters who might stumble into that web, maybe with their kids along. By the time I pulled into the station parking lot, my shirt was soaked with sweat despite the cool evening air. The ranger on duty, a guy named Marcus who I'd talked to before about hunting permits, took one look at my face and knew something was wrong. I told him everything. The trip lines, the surveillance setup, the supply caches. He listened without interrupting, but I could see his expression getting more serious with every detail. When I finished, he made a call to his supervisor, then another to someone he wouldn't name. Within an hour, that quiet ranger station turned into a command center. State police showed up first, then federal marshals, then guys in unmarked SUVs who didn't introduce themselves. They had me go through the whole story 3 more times, marking locations on topographical maps, describing every detail I could remember. One of the marshals, a woman with sharp eyes and a Boston accent, showed me a series of photographs on her tablet. "Recognize any of these items?" she asked. My throat went dry when I saw pictures of the exact same military surplus binoculars, the same brand of MREs, even the same type of paracord. Turns out they'd been tracking someone for months, a former Army Ranger named Derek Hoffman, who'd robbed a credit union in Spokane and disappeared into the mountains with $400,000 in cash. They kept me there until almost midnight, going over satellite images of the area, having me pinpoint exactly where I'd been. The federal guys were particularly interested in the layout of the trip lines, the pattern of the surveillance. "He's good," one of them muttered, studying my hand-drawn map. "Real good. Textbook perimeter defense." They told me Hoffman had extensive survival training, had spent 3 tours in Afghanistan setting up forward operating bases. He knew how to disappear, how to live off the grid indefinitely. What scared them most was that he'd been out there for 2 months already, and I was the first person to find any trace of him. If I hadn't stumbled into his security net, they might never have located him. The thought that I'd been walking around in his crosshairs made me sick to my stomach. A week later, I got a call from the marshal with the Boston accent. They'd found the site exactly where I'd described it, but Hoffman was gone. He'd cleared out fast but left evidence behind. The trip lines, some of the supplies, even fingerprints on the ammunition boxes. But here's what really messed with my head. They found my campsite from the night before I discovered the traps. I'd set up camp about 300 yards from his perimeter, close enough that he would have seen my fire, heard me moving around. The marshals found observation notes he'd kept, and I was in them. Single hunter, blue tent, Remington 700, non-threat, written in neat block letters. He'd been watching me the entire time I was there, probably through those military binoculars, deciding whether I was worth worrying about. I'd slept peacefully that night, cooked my dinner over an open fire, never knowing a wanted fugitive was studying my every move. They never caught him, at least not that I heard about. The marshals said he probably had multiple sites set up throughout the Bitterroots, moving between them like a ghost. They found 2 more camps over the next month, same setup, same level of paranoid security, but always abandoned by the time they arrived. I haven't been back to that part of the forest since. I still hunt, but I stick to familiar territory now, places where I know every trail and clearing. Sometimes when I'm out there, especially when the woods go quiet, I remember that feeling of being watched, of walking through someone else's trap. Sarah thinks I'm paranoid now, the way I check for trip lines even on marked trails, the way I glass the ridge lines looking for surveillance positions. But she didn't see what I saw, didn't feel what it was like to realize you'd been hunted without knowing it. Somewhere out there, Derek Hoffman is probably still running, still watching, still setting his traps, and I can't help but wonder how many other hunters have walked through his web and never even known it. I'd been feeling burnt out for months, stuck in that limbo where every photo I took felt like a copy of the last. The kind of creative drought that makes everything feel gray. I figured some isolation might clear my head, so I packed up my Canon, a borrowed tent, and a week's worth of instant oatmeal, and drove west until the radio static swallowed every station. Big Bend had always been on my list, vast, harsh, and quiet in a way that felt like it could wipe the mental clutter clean. I set up camp in a remote area a few miles off the main trail, the kind of spot where even park rangers only swing by every couple weeks. No service, no sound, just the wind dragging heat over the rocks. The first day was everything I needed. I hiked until sunset, filled up 2 memory cards with golden cliffs and pale desert skies, then sat by the fire listening to the creak of branches and the low chirp of whatever critters ruled the night out there. By the time I crawled into the tent, the kind of sleep that only comes after a long day in the sun hit me fast. The second day followed the same rhythm: photograph, hike, cook, repeat. But that night, something shifted. The wind had died down, and the air inside the tent felt heavier somehow, like the desert was holding its breath. I was lying there, halfway between awake and asleep, when I heard it. Clear as if someone were kneeling beside me, just inches from the fabric wall, a voice whispered my name. Not shouted, not called out from a distance. Just a quiet, deliberate, "David." My eyes snapped open, and for a few seconds I didn't move a muscle. I didn't even blink. The whisper hadn't come from inside my head. It hadn't echoed or drifted. It had weight, a nearness to it. I sat up slowly, listening hard, straining against the silence. Nothing. Just the dry hush of the desert at night. I unzipped the tent an inch and peeked out. The fire was low, barely glowing. No movement, no footsteps. Eventually, I convinced myself it had to be a dream, my brain recycling the sound of my own voice, maybe. A trick of exhaustion. Still, I didn't sleep much after that. The next morning, while making coffee over the tiny camp stove, I circled the tent out of habit, checking for scorpions or snakes. That's when I saw it. Just outside the back corner of the tent, pressed into the soft dirt, was a single boot print. Not mine. Mine were Vibram soles, thick and hexagonal. This one was narrow, clean, and had that cross-hatched grip you see on lighter hiking boots. I squatted down and stared at it for a long time. No other prints nearby, no drag marks, just that one perfect step, like someone had walked up behind the tent, stood still, and then vanished. I tried to shake it off by keeping busy, packing up my gear and hiking deeper into the trail loops, hoping to distract myself with work. But the air felt different that day, drier, more brittle. Every time I stopped to take a photo, I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone ducking behind a rock or standing too still among the brush. There was nothing, of course, just cacti, dust, and silence stretching for miles. Still, that boot print kept nagging at me. It didn't make sense. If someone was passing through, there should have been more tracks, maybe tire marks. But the ground around my tent had been clean, except for that one. That night, I couldn't settle. I skipped the fire, ate cold food straight from the pack, and stayed inside the tent with the flashlight clipped to the ceiling. Around midnight, I started hearing faint crunches in the distance, like someone stepping slowly on dry gravel, pausing, and then stepping again. I told myself it was an animal, probably a javelina, maybe a deer, but something about the rhythm didn't feel right. Animals move with skittish energy, scattered and fast. This was slow, intentional. I didn't sleep at all. I just laid there, waiting for another whisper, gripping the handle of my utility knife until my fingers ached. By morning, I was done pretending this was nothing. I packed everything in record time and headed back to the ranger station, legs stiff from not sleeping and nerves frayed thin. The ranger on duty, a woman named Kathy with deep crow's feet and a sun-beaten hat, listened while I described what happened. I didn't expect much, maybe just a shrug and a reminder that it was probably another camper messing around. But she didn't shrug. Her expression stayed still, After a pause, she said, "That site was near the base of Mule Ears, right?" I nodded. She hesitated, then added, "2 years ago, a guy went missing out there. Solo camper. Same area. Never found his body." That would have been eerie enough, but it got worse. She turned her chair and pulled open a drawer, rummaging through some old field reports until she found a faded manila folder. Inside was a missing persons bulletin printed on a sheet so sun-worn it had curled at the corners. The man's name was David Merrill. 33 years old, also a photographer. Disappeared on the second night of his trip. They found his tent, his pack, even his camera bag, all intact. No sign of struggle, just gone. The date on the report made my skin prickle. Exactly 2 years ago to the week. I don't know what I was supposed to feel in that moment. Fear, disbelief, maybe both. But what hit me first was this weird sense of overlap, like I'd stepped into someone else's unfinished story without meaning to. Same profession. Same area, same damn name. It felt less like coincidence and more like, I don't know, interruption? I asked Kathy if anyone had ever reported hearing voices or weird activity in that part of the park. She didn't answer right away. Then she said, "Some folks say the desert doesn't forget, sometimes it echoes." I don't even know what that means, but I haven't been able to forget those words since. I drove straight out of Big Bend that afternoon, ignoring every good spot I passed that would have made for a perfect photo. The desert felt heavier as I left, like something was watching from the hills but too far away to see. I haven't camped solo since then. Honestly, I haven't even looked at those photos I took. I dumped them onto an external hard drive when I got home and shoved it in the back of a drawer. It's still there, still untouched. And even now, when I think about opening it, something in me recoils like I'd be inviting something back in. A couple months later, I got curious enough to look up other missing persons reports from the park. There are a few, but none as similar as the one with my name. No new updates, no sightings, just a cold case filed away under dust and desert silence. I keep wondering if what I heard that night wasn't the other David calling out for help, or warning me. Like he got pulled into something and the whisper was the only piece that could slip through. I'll never know. But sometimes I lie awake, picturing the fabric of the tent just inches from my face, and that voice threading through it, calm and familiar. I never heard it again, never found another print. But every once in a while I catch myself turning sharply if someone says my name from behind. It's automatic now, like muscle memory. I don't camp anymore, not alone. And especially not in the desert, because if the land really does echo, like Kathy said, then I think that part of Texas is still repeating something not finished, something that once looked at me through the thin wall of that tent, and maybe decided I wasn't the one it was looking for. Not yet, anyway.